Hello, everyone. Welcome to the MsTexasShow. In today's episode, we're going to have a special guest, Miss Kateri Gasper, who is from New York City, Queens County DA's office, who also works as a consultant at the National White Collar Crime Center. In today's episode, we are going to discuss the relationship about sexting, cyberbullying, sextortion, and sex trafficking and its relationships, what you need to do about prevention. So tune in.
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers, and last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault,
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Miss Texas Show. Today, we are so excited to welcome our special guest, Miss Kateri Gasper. Miss Kateri Gasper is working for the National White Collar Crime Center, and she is a consultant and contractor who designs and teaches classes actually for the prosecutors. And we're going to let her introduce herself later on about all the good things and exactly what this all means to us. Meanwhile, she is an experienced head of the cybercrime unit with a demonstrated history of working in the law enforcement industry, nationally known expert on cybercrime and child exploitation. She's a speaker at conferences and available for consultations. Her areas of expertise in the law enforcement include also legal writing, trials, criminal law, and hearings. Her strong information technology professional, she has a degree in Bachelor's of Arts focused in mathematics and computer science from Boston University. Her extensive litigation and trial experiences and all the good things that she has done, and I can't wait to interview her and share her experience with you. And I also want to mention that currently she is also a supervisor at the Intake and Case Assessment Bureau at the National White 3Cs, which I just verified. It's the National White Collar Crime Center. Welcome, Ms. Gasper.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here today.
So tell us, Ms. Gasper, what does this all mean? Start with, I know that we introduced you today that you're working as a consultant and contractor, so what did you do like before that you were with Queens County DA's office?
So let me give you a little bit about my background, and that will sort of set the stage for everything. I worked in the Queens County, New York District Attorney's Office, and I'm still there. So I've been there for 34 years. I've done basically every single type of crime that you can imagine. I have prosecuted throughout the years. I spent many years prosecuting gang type activities, a lot of Asian gang activities in the Flushing, Queens area. I was involved in working in our intake and bureau for a number of years as a supervisor. That is what I'm back actually doing now. But before that, for many years, about almost from the year 2002 until about 2021, I was head of our cybercrime unit. And during that time, I concentrated on the exploitation of children on the internet. And mainly because there were so many cases in that area, that's what my area of concentration was. But I also handled many fraud type cases, many elder abuse type cases involving frauds of seniors on the internet and things like that. Things even scam email that you might get, or phone calls you might get saying that they were from Microsoft, many different types of cases. But I concentrated mainly on the child exploitation. And also later in my career, I helped draft legislation for New York dealing with the dissemination of intimate images, the illegal dissemination of intimate images, I should say, by parties, among other parties involving adults. Because when those intimate images involve children, of course, they are considered child sex abuse material. So I now unofficially retired from the district attorney's office in February of 2021. And about a year later, I was asked to return there to work in the intake and case assessment bureau as a supervisor, because I had done that for many years and because I had experience in doing that. And basically what I do is I mentor the younger assistants in dealing with all different types of cases. We handle all the arrests in Queens County and write them up into complaints, and then defendants are arraigned in court. So we prepare the case. We train assistants how to interview witnesses, how to interview law enforcement officials, how to relate criminal law to the facts of a case, things of that sort. And during the last 2 years, what I've also been doing is working for the National White Collar Crime Center, creating and teaching classes for prosecutors mainly, because that is an area of expertise that they are now working into and want to address as an area of law enforcement that needs more education and training in terms of child sexual exploitation cases, in terms of sexting cases, sextortion cases, sex trafficking, whether they involve both teenagers and adults in these types of cases. So that's really what I've been doing for the National White Collar Crime Center. I also work a little bit with the National District Attorneys Association in doing those, helping create templates for questions for law enforcement in those types of areas. And I've spoken around the country in different various conferences on the issue of sexting among teens, on the defenses in child exploitation cases and how to overcome those defenses. And I've created a presentation on cyberbullying to sextortion, or to sexting, to sextortion, to sex trafficking, and how all of those things can lead into one another. And so I have been a little bit busy in my retirement age, but I am enjoying every minute of it.
Wow, this is amazing. I'm like jogging down the notes of so many amazing things that you have done and still are doing. And first of all, congratulations for your retirement. And I see you certainly keep yourself busy for your retirement. And thank you so much for the work and the important work that you're doing for our country, for our community. So, on behalf of myself and the show and our audience, I just want to thank you for the work you do.
Thank you very much. I think that what you're doing by getting the word out there in terms of both sex trafficking and domestic violence is great work that you're doing, and very, very much needed in the community at large.
Thank you. I believe, it takes an army for us to fight this together, and it's going to take generations of work to end this for good and for all. And education is the key. So we're right on the spot. This is the theme of the show to, really educate people so that we can combine hope, love, and unity in our community for a society free of crime that our children can be free. And that being said, you talked about those terminologies. Some of our audience might have heard about, some might never have heard about. You talked about sexting, you talked about sex trafficking, you talked about sextortion, you talked about cyberbullying. Can you sort of define each one of them and explain to our audience what the differences are and what does that actually mean to them?
Absolutely. Sexting is unfortunately one of the things that is seen very, very often among teens. And sexting is the exchanging of either by words or images of sexually explicit material. It can be it can be as simple as certain words that are of a sexual nature, or they can be pictures that are sexually explicit. And education is also my main goal in terms of this, because particularly in the area of sexting, because one of the things that I have done is gone into schools and spoken to even young children about the dangers of the internet, and as they get older and even middle school, talk about the issues of sexting, because of the way the world is now, it seems that it has become very sexualized, and particularly teenagers are very vulnerable to that. And so they think that it's okay for them to send these basically naked pictures of themselves to other people. And that's really what they're doing. And so one of the things that I do by speaking about that particular subject is trying to educate teenagers on the dangers of doing that, because once you send a picture out there, no matter what, you can never get it back, and it's there forever. In addition, sextortion. Sexting can lead to sextortion. And sextortion is where somebody may have intimate images of you, sexually explicit images, or even a video of you, and where they threaten to either expose it to other people, or and they tell you that either you have to perform certain acts, which may be sexual acts, or they tell you that you have to pay money in exchange for not releasing those pictures. And I've seen it very recently. I had a friend that called me one night, very upset about his son. And there are many, many boys who are victims of sextortion. And he had called me where, somebody he was communicating with on Instagram, he thought it was another teenage girl, and he had, unbeknownst, has sent a picture of himself thinking that it was okay, and then immediately started receiving threats, pay this, pay that, otherwise I'm going to send this out to your family and all your friends on Instagram. So that's an example of sextortion, and I've seen it in many cases that I have handled in the Queen's DA's office, of both teenagers, and adults who have gotten into trapped in these cycles involving sextortion. And a lot of that then can lead to sex trafficking. And sex trafficking is where a person is and in many cases a woman, but there are cases where there are males that are used in the area of sex trafficking, where they're basically utilized for the purpose of conducting sexually explicit behavior in exchange, where a pimp or a person sort of controlling them for many different reasons, is taking money from the person that they're having sexual contact with. And so the person who is the victim, the person who is being trafficked, is not, some people talk about sex workers. I mean, they are not sex workers. They are victims of crime who are being trafficked to be forced into having sex against their will with other people. And it's basically other forms of rape, but it's being paid for by a third party to the person that's controlling them. And it is very, it's all three types of, whether it's sextortion, or sexting or sex trafficking are very have horrendous effects on the victims themselves, whether it starts even as cyberbullying, which we all learn about in school now and we hear about all the time. And it can start as cyberbullying and lead ultimately to sex trafficking. And these victims feel, you know, humiliated and many times embarrassed that how did I let myself fall into this trap? And so it can be very difficult to get them to even report, you know, themselves as being victims. And so particularly with teenagers, that is, you know, one of the things that I try to work on with, you know, with an education is educating them, you know, if this happens to you, it's not your fault. You are a teenager, you are a child, you should report this. If you're an adult, this can still happen to you. You can get caught up in things. Many victims of domestic violence are caught up in their roles that they play in these, you know, in this violence, you know, violent, you know, atmosphere. And so it's helping them take that step out of there. And I think that education is one of the things, getting out there and talking about it, encouraging people is one of the things to help all types of victims, you know, break away from the bonds of their victimization and report these incidents to, you know, people that they trust, to law enforcement. But even to people that they trust, I think it's important to report this to, so they can help them take the next step, whatever that appropriate step is.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gasper, for explaining the relationship between each other and in depth of, you know, which each of them entail and what other relationship one lead to another, particularly in this age with the internet, with social media. Like I even feel like TikTok. Okay, so one day the girl was telling me, I need to show you that video. I'm like, oh, okay, and I tried to do that, but I'm not that good. Like, you know, the teenagers and they're like, okay, Facebook is for older folks, it's not for us. And Instagram and what are the other you know, all the platforms that they're using. So especially and correct me if I were wrong, ever since COVID, the just like the social media, it has been going on, but since COVID it just like has gone to the next level. So it's really educational and very helpful to inform not only the teenagers but also the adults, not only the teenagers themselves but also their parents and their guardians. Can you tell us, you know, a few examples of what are the platforms they might use in addition to Instagram?
So that's actually an excellent question. Some of the platforms that the teenagers are using now, because I will say that, just preface it by saying that when I first started speaking to schools a number of years ago, I would ask, you know, the children in the auditorium or the classroom to raise their hands about how many of them thought they knew more about their parents, you know, about the internet and technology, you know, how many thought they knew more than their parents did. And I would say that almost 100% of the class would raise their hands. The good thing is that has changed. Now in the past couple of years, when I've spoken to classes and actually I've even done it in some Zoom meetings, I've spoken to schools, you know, during COVID in that manner. But the percentage has gone way down. There are parents who are getting more tech savvy because, as you know, as the generations grow up and they grew up in technology, were tech savvy to begin with. But teenagers are teenagers, and teenagers love to hide their activities. So some of the things they do is they go find these different platforms where they think their parents aren't going to find them. One of the reasons they don't use text messaging is because it's on their phone, and so somebody could see it. So they use things like TikTok, or they use Snapchat, which, you know, they all think that everything disappears after 7 seconds. And, you know, being in law enforcement, I can tell you that that's not really true, and that there are ways for law enforcement to obtain some, by legal process, there are some ways for us to obtain further information from, some of these platforms, including Snapchat. There's TikTok. There is Telegram that they use. They use Discord. They use Whisper. Sometimes they're still using Kick Messenger. All of those are basically sort of, they think they're undercover, chat platforms where they can exchange information, they can exchange chats, they can exchange pictures and videos and things like that without people knowing. But there are ways for law enforcement to gain access to those using legal process when they are notified about an illegal activity. And so, if you're afraid to report something, don't be, because law enforcement may be able to find out if you don't know who is threatening you or, taking your pictures or anything. There are ways to find out who those people are. And so it is very important, to report it. But those are, and every day, I in my presentation on sexting, I have to update it all the time because the platforms change all the time. Like there's Chatterbot now is a new one that I've recently heard about. Discord has been around for a while. Whisper has been around for a while. But teenagers seem to find all these new platforms as, when they come out. And sometimes, it's a struggle for law enforcement to keep up, but we do the best that we can do in trying to keep up and educate ourselves, even educating ourselves on the different platforms, how they operate, how, whether we can obtain, evidence from them by legal process. And so those are all, steps that law enforcement educates itself on in a continuing manner too.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm writing down. I said, you know what? I know. I've even used Discord in the past. Snapchat. I signed up. I'm like, no, I don't feel comfortable like those pictures disappearing, and I don't really know like where those pictures go and everything. But I know for teenagers, they might have the delusion, okay, it's gonna disappear. But thank you so much for explaining to our audience that they don't actually disappear, and there are ways law enforcement can access to that. So please, I want you to listen to Ms. Gasper here and be very careful of, the platform you so choose. And I guess the best advice, what would you give is, what would you give them as the best advice in terms of sending images, especially sexual images on public social media platforms or to strangers?
Well, the best advice I can give is don't send it. Don't send it, because once you send it, you can never get it back. I mean, there is a nonprofit organization called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And they have been around. They were founded by John Walsh, whose son, Adam Walsh, was kidnapped and unfortunately murdered. But he was a missing child. And at the time, I mean, I'm sure that everybody has seen milk cartons of missing children, and or maybe heard of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Their acronym is known as NETMEC. They do a tremendous amount of work in both keeping track of the sexual exploitation of teenagers. They do a tremendous amount of work in education. If you are in a parent group, a PTA or anything, they have presentations that can be utilized for community groups and parent groups. They have presentations that can be utilized for teenagers all the way down to kindergarten. They have presentations that are age appropriate, that talk about, online safety and things not to do and how to protect yourself online, how to be a good digital citizen. But the other thing they do is they keep track of all the reports of child sexual exploitation, whether it's involving child sexual exploitation material being exchanged, whether it's involved child sex trafficking, whether it's involved any type of child exploitation. There's something called child tourism, and that's where people travel to other countries to try to engage in sexual encounters with children in other countries that don't have as strict laws as we do regarding underage children. And they keep statistics on that. And one of the things during COVID, which they proved, and unfortunately, it's not really, the numbers are not going down. They're not reflective of sort of like us coming out of COVID, is the number of children that are sexually exploited every month. And they come out with weekly statistics. And when I say, I mean, we're not talking millions, we're talking tens of millions of reports that this organization receives. And you as a private citizen, they're not just, reports from law enforcement or reports from, they receive reports from Snapchat, from Facebook, from Instagram, from all of the social media when they, because there are ways that they can find out whether images of sexual images are being transmitted over their social media profiles and platforms. But private citizens can report to NCMEC any type of, trafficking they might see, any type of sexting they might see, or sextortion, whether they might come across it as a parent, whether they come across it as a victim, or they come across it as an eyewitness. They will take any type of report, and they will report it to local law enforcement in the area, so that every single report that they receive is investigated. And these are reports that they receive from all around the world. So it's not just, I don't want people to think that there's tens of millions in this country. These are from all around the world. But there are millions of reports that they receive on a yearly basis that occur within the United States. And, it is unfortunate that there is so much of this going on. And I want to emphasize how education is so important. And going back to, my advice is just don't take that picture. Just, be smart enough not to take that picture. There is a little public service video that NCMEC puts out that, talks about, what can happen, if you take that one picture and you think you're sending it to your boyfriend, and the only person that's going to see it is your boyfriend, because that's all you meant for the person to see. And then his friends are sitting around him and they're all going, "Ooh, what's that? What's that? Show me that picture." And then so he shows in the picture, and then one of the friends is, "Oh, send that to me." And so he says, "Okay," and sends it to him. And then the other friends say, "Send that to me." And then they start sending it around to the school. And, one of the things that I tell teenagers is, how many of you would walk down naked and it, in the hallway of your school? And it sounds awful. And to them, some of them giggle a little bit, but they're embarrassed. They're like, "Of course we would never do that. Like, we're not stupid. We would never do that." And I say to them, of course you would never do that, but then why would you send a picture like that to someone where everybody in your school could see it? And you can see when I talk to teenagers and I tell them that, it's like a light bulb lights up, like, "Oh, I never thought of it that way." Or, or how would you like if your mother saw that, or your grandmother, or one of your, grandparents saw that, or a relative. And, and so when you put it into that kind of perspective in terms of education, and that's what you need to do for teenagers, is really put it on their level. Like, what is affecting them? And how is it going to affect them? And I think that's very important. And so my advice, overall would be not to send it all, but to explain why you don't send it at all. Just don't don't give a blanket statement, yes, it's bad, but why is it bad? And what are the consequences of, what can happen if you decide to send it out?
Well, thank you so much. This is amazing. This is so great advice. So basically, what Miss Gasper is saying is just do not take the pictures. And when it comes to parenting, when it comes to guardians, how you explain, it's kind of like, the wine cabinet for the children. You tell them not to do it, then they will do it. But instead, explain to them, what are the consequences and why they should not do that. And I love how you explain, like, it's literally like you're walking down the hallway in the public school naked, because this image, even though it might appear or you think it's gonna be shared to your boyfriend and only your boyfriend, and will go public because it one person lead to another. And I mean, God knows if they even put that on social media, you never know whose hand it land in. So this is great information for our audience, whether you're an adult who are watching out for your children, for your cared ones, loved ones, or you're a teenager yourself, and watch out for the consequences that might cause you. And Ms. Gasper, you also talked about your areas of expertise about creating and teaching classes for prosecutors. And once again, I cannot emphasize the importance, because I think there's a gap. One is like the prevention side, one is about the intervention side. So when it comes to intervention, there are gaps, like how do the prosecutors prosecute the perpetrators, and there's also like the investigations with the law enforcement and everything. So what are those classes? I'm so curious to learn about it.
So, I mean, one of the main classes I teach is sexting among teens, and and I speak as I said, I speak at conferences around the country, and I've done that presentation. And basically what it does is it talks about, what is sexting and the idea behind sexting, and what it means and the definition of it. And then I kind of go into, who is sexting, who out there is really sexting. And there's been some kind of studies about it, because the reality is that most teenagers today have cell phones. And then most of them have smartphones, so they have unlimited access to the internet. And unfortunately, what I've experienced, and I guess I would like to see this change, is that most parents don't put parental controls on their children's cell phones. And it's amazing the number of parents that don't even know their children's password to their cell phone, so that they can check to see what their children are doing. And that even goes for teenagers, because teenagers are still children. The human brain does not fully develop until somebody is about 25 or 26 years old. So the reality is that teenagers, up to that age, but I mean, I'm talking basically, 15, 16, and 17 years old, don't really appreciate the full consequences of their actions, so that they don't really understand. They can't really look ahead like we can as adults and see those consequences. Like we can look ahead and say, oh my gosh, yes, if I send this picture, it could get around every place. They don't see that consequence. And so that's one of the things that I talk about, is that, some of the studies that have shown that, it's teenagers who are like really, in those ages. But unfortunately, it's not only those ages too. It's actually younger children too, tweens, or, like 12, 13, and 14-year-olds. And I even had a case recently where I was doing a presentation, and I had a parent come up to me afterwards, and she was telling me her third grader was in school, and the girls all had smartphones with cameras on them and unlimited access. And, so they were in the bathroom, and they thought it would be cool, to pull down their pants in the stalls and take pictures of their private areas and send them to each other. I don't know why anybody thought this was a good idea, but the parent was telling me about this, and she was telling me her daughter was outside of the stall and she heard the girls giggling and, in the stalls and doing all this, and she felt very uncomfortable. So she kind of like snuck out of the bathroom without saying anything, very quietly, so that her friends wouldn't know that she wasn't there any longer. And I mean, one of the things what I said to that parent is, congratulations. You have done an amazing job raising your child to sort of question these things at the get-go and not just kind of go along with the flow, because that is what a lot of, young people do, is just go along with the flow. Well, everybody else is doing it, so I'll just do it too. And that's not a good way to think when it comes to things like this. It's not a good way to think about a lot of behaviors that teenagers engage in. But, this type of behavior, it can have so many drastic consequences to it that it is not a good way to think. And so, I talk about that, the ages that the children are start sexting at. I talk about, why are they sexting? Why are they sexting? Because they think it's cool. A girl likes a boy, and so she wants to impress him, or she wants to, see if he likes her. So she thinks it's okay to send a naked picture of herself to him. It's to prove it as a dare, friends are daring somebody to do it, so they do it. It's all about that sort of, like go along with the flow type of thing. It's also, some of the other reasons that they sext is because sometimes they may be talking to somebody who even says they're an older adult. And as a teenage girl, it's like, oh my God, this is really cool that this older guy really likes me and he thinks I'm cool and he understands me and like he really gets me and like he can really relate to me and like I can have a real relationship with him, and they don't understand really what ultimately that person is after. And what that person is either after ultimately meeting up to have engage in some kind of sexual conduct with that teenager, or for the purpose of just collecting pictures from that teenager. And so both of those can have dire consequences, for those teenagers. So I talk a little bit about that and why they are sexting. And then I talk about the different kind of platforms that they're sexting and what law enforcement can obtain by serving legal process on those different platforms. And so it's mainly an education for law enforcement on like, well, you have a case, involving Instagram. So you can get somebody's profile, you can subpoena or do a search warrant for a profile for what are called IP addresses, which are the connection logs between that social platform and the person who's posting those things on the platform. You can, and so I talk about a lot of different platforms like that. When I talk about a presentation in defenses in child exploitation cases, it's for prosecutors, how to overcome if somebody says, well, some other dude did it. How do you prove that your defendant did it? So it gets into a lot of technical terms and things like that in terms of proving your case. One of the things that I found is that, and particularly in this day and age, when we're talking about a lot of people who have mental disabilities, and that is both on the side of the victim, because I've seen a number of victims who have different various mental disabilities, who are on the autism spectrum, who are become very compliant with, instructions and things that people are generating to them. And it's very sad to see that they become victims of these types of crimes very easily. But unfortunately, I've also seen it on the other end, where some of these people, also become perpetrators of the crime because it's very difficult for them to control some of their desires and likes. And so it's important to get help for them on both sides of the spectrum, and not just to take a sort of like all or nothing attitude. I mean, you have to look at the individual themselves, whether or not they're a perpetrator or a victim of a crime. And so those are the kind of things, it involves a lot of technical aspects of prosecuting a case, talking about a lot of teenagers and the different types of consequences they can fall into. But I end each presentation with the idea that education is the key to all of it. Education, the community, is the key to all of changing all of this type of behavior, and trying to I mean, unfortunately, I don't see a time when it is completely eliminated, but I see what I see in terms of particularly the sexting and maybe the sextortion is that there will be a time that when parents, these teenagers are now parents, and they're going to know about these things. And so they're going to be watching their children much more. And I think that, as we've seen, over generations, that's really what's happened, in terms of we saw a generation of children watching TV all the time. And of course, TV was nothing like it is today. But then there were a generation of parents that said, oh, well, some of that TV was not very good, so now I'm going to monitor what my children watch on TV. And it's the same thing with technology. As technology is going to advance, and great things happen with technology. We can talk to our relatives all around the world in the blink of an eye. We can have this, this presentation, and it can go out to everybody. And there's amazing, amazing things that come as a result of the internet and technology. And unfortunately, with every good thing, there are some bad things. And so we need to address those issues. And I think that's, and I try to address those in the presentations that I do and in the work that I do on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you so much. This is so important, especially when you say about, when you were talking, and I'm thinking like, yeah, that's so true. So, Facebook back then, and I was like, did I used to take selfies? I was just chatting with a friend recently. I'm like, since when did I take selfie? I used to ask people to take pictures of me, but now I'm like selfie. And at first I was kind of shy. I'm like, I'm taking picture of myself. But now it's like becoming like a norm. And my friend was like, yeah, that thing is going away. I said, no, I don't think that's going away. That's more like it's become a norm. It's our generation. So we have this thing called selfie. So the next generation, they might have something. So it's really important that you're talking about this topic to make us think, what's going to happen next. But really, to be precautious about what's going to happen and be careful about what is going to get out there so that you can protect yourself, protect your children. So this is like so important. And that really leads to my next question. And, you've mentioned, and thank you for the work that you did for the legislature work that you did for New York about removing the illegal images and everything. And I forgot which platform. I recently got a notification that they were asking them to remove. And to be honest, I can't remember exactly, but it wasn't something like Facebook or Instagram. It was just like a website. I wouldn't think that, something would occur about sex trafficking or sextortion. So, can you tell us a little bit more about this legislature and what it all entails and what people can do about it, and what you think? I know right now is the legislative session, so maybe are there any improvements that can be made?
Well, one of the things is that it's a nationwide issue. It is definitely a nationwide issue, and many jurisdictions around the country have instituted similar types of laws. And basically, it's the illegal dissemination of intimate images. And it involves adults mainly. I mean, and those types of intimate images would involve adults. And it occurs in many different types of cases. I mean, we've seen it in many domestic violence cases where a spouse is, or, an intimate partner is trying to use these intimate images to threaten or try to get the other party to do something that they want them to do, or to not break up, or to take more pictures or something like that. So, it being a nationwide issue, many jurisdictions have started instituting laws around the country, and you can check in your own jurisdiction whether they have these types of laws. And they're very, you have to be very careful about how we institute them. And we did a tremendous amount of research, because in the United States, we have something called the First Amendment, and, which allows us freedom of speech. And so there was an argument at one time that, well, that's freedom of speech. And we argued that, no, it wasn't freedom of speech, that it was really, what we were trying to do was we were trying to, protect people from the distortion of, of intimate speech or free speech, by taking it into a category that your intimate images are something that are private to you. So it's protecting your right to privacy, which is another privacy that's guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And so, in balancing those two things, we've come up with, many jurisdictions have come up with these, laws that make it illegal for one to send out or distribute, even to one other person or on a social media site, an intimate image which shows an intimate part of a person who can be identifiable, in the picture. And of course, it's identifiable by the victim because they know their own body. And usually when it's sent out by the perpetrator, they send it out with a message, look at this, and they have a derogatory term, or a lot of different types of messages, and a lot of times it is posted on social media pages. So the laws have created both a criminal right of action and a civil right of action, so that in many laws what you can do is you can follow up civilly with suing the individual who has posted these types of images and pictures without your permission. And that's what it is. It's without permission and authority, and where you haven't given us. And so in New York, we passed a similar type law, which is now on the record in New York, and they, we've always tried to tweak it a little bit, and try to, when something pops up, whether we say, oh, that didn't, maybe that won't cover that kind of scenario, the state legislature, will look at it again and add an amendment to it. And they've been extremely, I would say in New York, they've been very proactive in following through. The same with New York City. We have an administrative code in New York City, and they've been very proactive in that. And I know that a number of other states have been too. So it's getting around the country. If you find that your state doesn't have one, please contact your local, legislature, and see if they would be willing to introduce that kind of legislation in your state legislature.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think it's very educational to for the citizens to know what their local legislatures are, so they know their rights, so that they can really protect themselves accordingly. So wherever and whichever state you're listening in, make sure that you check your local laws to see if that does exist, and if it doesn't, like what Ms. Gasper said, talk to your local lawmakers and see what can be done, and introduce that to, probably not in this legislative session, but the work can begin anytime, so that you can get it introduced sooner than later. And that is so helpful, Ms. Gasper, for all the information, from the education to our audience who are potential victims, whether it's sexting, sextortion, cyberbullying, and sex trafficking, as well as to our prosecutors about the trainings that you provide for them. And thank you so much for all the work that you do. I cannot express enough. But before I let you go, I would like to ask, is there any call to action or takeaway you'd like to leave with our audience?
I guess the biggest takeaway is, as I've emphasized over and over again, and first, what I'd like to do is I'd like to thank you, Miss Texas and the Miss Texas Show, first for having me on here. I'm very honored to be on here, your passion for the work is just unbelievable, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. It's just, I'm only, one in a basically big network of people working together to, what I want to say is educate. And the biggest takeaway I would say is educate. Let us educate our youth in society on the sort of the dangers of the internet. Educate them on being good digital citizens, of respecting each other on the internet. And that's a very important thing is respect each other in real life, and respect each other. Teenagers, respect each other in your dating environment. Adults, respect each other in your dating environment. Respect each other in what you post on the internet. Respect each other for what you say to each other, how you portray each other. I think all of those are very important issues overall. And that's really what my takeaway is.
Thank you. And it is my honor too. And I know that you are so busy and having a busy retirement life, doing all the important work. So thank you so much for making the time for being on the show. And lastly, I do want to also thank you. And I wanted to, kind of ask you about takeaway for what you pointed out earlier. It's not just girls. It's not just women. And you pointed out very importantly that it's also boys. It's also men. And they are kind of like underlooked, and because in the culture, in any of the culture, they are taught not to speak out. They're taught to suck it up. So what can you leave to the audience about this?
I mean, that is a very good point, and very, very appropriate point, because it is boys and girls, and I mean, it's hard not to be embarrassed. It's really hard not to be embarrassed. It's really hard not to be humiliated. I mean, and it's the same with domestic violence victims. I mean, but it's important to speak up. I mean, regardless of, and I would say, regardless of your background, regardless of who you are, regardless of your LBGT plus, identity. It is important that you speak up if something happened to you, regardless of your ethnic background, regardless of your, cultural background. It is important for you to speak up and not allow somebody to take control of your life. You need take back control of your life. I mean, and if you have to start small, start with someone you trust. Start, with your best friend and tell them, and but don't keep it a secret. That's the important thing. Don't keep it a secret. Don't keep it all locked inside of you. Let it out and share it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I know that we talked about inviting you back again in October at our event. I cannot wait for the moment for you to tell more people and make more impact in our community. Thank you again, Ms. Gasper.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.